sister, what have you done? Hey, little sister, who's the only one?
Yeah, he's calling from New York. Okay. Hey, George, you there?
Hey, Matt.
Yeah, how you doing?
Yeah, it's terrific to talk to you, and Don, too, I believe?
That's right.
I'm a big fan, and not just in terms of size, up here in New York.
All right.
On the gay rights thing, we are currently going through that in New York, actually.
Oh, uh-huh.
Because, as you may be aware, our governor had to leave office.
Right.
Rather colorfully. And he had promised, if he got into office, and his lieutenant governor as well, that they would put the issue up, you know, for consideration, because previous governors have not. Well, Mr. Spitzer is back in private life, and his successor is following through on the promise, but the state government zorched it again.
Yeah.
And it's funny that we're hearing all the same nonsense, and recently it's come up again from the usual folks, because a higher-up state court decided that since New York, by law, recognizes foreign marriages, including, I believe, same-sex unions.
Right.
Excuse me, because they've recognized foreign marriages, that would include same-sex unions. So if, say, a couple from wherever, Spain, comes over here, they're still married if they're in New York. Well, the religious conservatives have a real problem with this, and we're hearing the same thing about activist judges in our own state. And two things about that. Number one,
chestnut of activist judges.
Two things. First of all, isn't it interesting how judges overnight become activists when they push the buttons of certain factions?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, Judge Roy Jones in Dover, Pennsylvania was, you know, a Republican-appointed judge who none of the conservative element figured that he could possibly come down against intelligent design, and the minute that he does, he's an activist judge. Let's ignore the fact that he's probably just honest and observant of the law, because he came down in disagreement with him, all of a sudden he's an activist judge.
Indeed, yeah. I downloaded the Kitzmiller PDF, and I read the whole thing, and it's a very tightly reasoned decision.
Yeah.
Whether you philosophically agree or disagree, you cannot say that this fellow, as a judicial officer, is exercising bad faith or incompetence. He did his job.
Yeah, I
completely think he did a fabulous job. He did great.
And so now the judges in our state are getting the same business. And again, if you read the decision, I believe it was Hernandez, but don't quote me on that. It was the decision about, well, if foreign marriages might be same-sex, and we have to acknowledge that. If you read the decision, again, it's tight points of state constitutional law. I'm not saying that judges never go off the beam, because obviously sometimes they do. They're people. But in every case where you hear, well, you know, activist judges, et cetera, in almost every case, if you read the decision, you will find precedent law, logical analysis, and this is why I'm deciding this way. You may not agree with it, but it's just slander at some point.
Yeah,
the other side to scream activism.
Yeah,
you know, you've kind of played into something. You know, you're calling without having seen the show. If you're calling from New York, right?
That is true.
But you've unwittingly played into kind of one of the themes I'm talking about is some of the hysterics that come up, where people are making all these wild claims in order to kind of draw attention away from the fact that they really don't have a case. And I think that this is exactly one of those cases, right, where you're claiming activist judges when in reality they're not activists; they're just disagreeing with you, and you're blowing smoke to try to hide this fact.
There are a number of instances where I completely disagree with rulings that, for example, the U.S. Supreme Court's made. I'm going to go ahead and take this one because it's going to clear the lines, and I don't think it's going to take too long.
Okay, good plan.
Kevin, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Listen, I got a question for you because this has been a big debate about this. I'm a little bit of, I'm with you guys, but I have a conservative tendency in my personality.
Right.
And you know, these broad issues are certainly legitimate to discuss, I mean, which is certainly okay. But I do have a question, and I want to see if you guys have an answer or an approach or whatever.
Go ahead.
You know, it just seems to me a logical consequence of gay marriage, and I'm not against gay marriage, but I do want these kinds of questions discussed. What if somebody does, let's say, assume now, sincerely, not a crazy, not a jerk or a crank, they want to marry their pet. You know, and maybe we should allow that. I understand that. But, I mean, let's say you're a policymaker here and you're looking at our society.
I can take this.
And you're thinking, well, you don't know the answer with certainty, I guess. I don't know. But, I mean, I'd like to hear your approach to that. That is a legitimate question that comes up.
It's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
And I'm not opposed at all to discussing any of these things. I just have yet to hear arguments that I think are very sound on the other side. So how I would answer that is marriage at a sort of fundamental level is a contract between two people to sort of take care of each other. They have special privileges within the society and these sorts of things. And so you have basically, at its fundamental point, it's a contract between two people that have to enter it as sort of conscious adults, right? So if one is coercing another, if it's a shotgun marriage, then that's not a good thing, right? If it's a parent and a child, or a child being coerced into it, that's not a good thing, and we've had that with the Mormons, right? So if it's a dog, the dog cannot give consent because it's not a reasoning human being, right? So you can define marriage as a contract between two people and not have a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Right?
There's actually two aspects to this slippery slope thing, and one is what Don's talking about, and the other one is this idea, well, if we let a man and woman marry, and then we expand that to allow people of the same sex to marry, what stops us from allowing all of these other things? And the answer to that's really simple. We allow people to own handguns and rifles and semi-automatic weapons, but we don't allow them to own automatic weapons and nuclear weapons. We can make an arbitrary stopping point. The slippery slope argument fails because we can decide this is the limit. The big question, or the big issue here is, how do you go about determining what is the best limit to encourage everybody else's freedoms and rights? And I think in this case,
every time you want to move the line, you have to re-argue it, right? It's not like you get dogs and cats for free when you have gay marriage. They're two different topics.
Yeah, and so my arbitrary point of drawing the line agrees completely with Don. As soon as you have two reasonable consenting adults, I don't care what their genitalia is, they agree to enter a contract to get certain benefits from it. I think that's pretty cut and dried simple. And denying some people the right because they have, they're choosing to marry somebody of the wrong gender, I think is an injustice that needs to be corrected. So if somebody comes along and wants to marry their dog, when your dog tells me he consents to it, then we can talk about it. And polygamy comes up a lot with this too.
What about polygamy? How would you answer with that?
I'm not necessarily sure that I'm opposed to polygamy in the sense that as long as we have a contract that is enforceable and that fairly represents all parties, and that everybody enters into it as a consenting adult. It's kind of like the same thing as merging a few businesses. I mean, I realize that this takes away some of the mystique of marriage, but we're really talking about legal rights and contracts. I'm not sure I'm opposed to it, but I wouldn't object to somebody arbitrarily drawing the line at two people and saying, even if their only justification was it's impractical for us to try and deal with multiple marriages that may then incorporate with other multiple marriages. We're just going to do this simply one person and one person. I think I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, given that marriage today is a two-person thing, and you are changing it to, potentially expanding it to a different or a broader two-person thing.
Yeah.
There's all these laws and such around marriage that can be easily adapted for two people. But when you start having multiple people, you really are forced at that point, if you're going to allow marriage of 3 and 5 and 7 people or whatever, then you have to start making very, very different laws. You have to overhaul the whole thing.
Yeah, the overhead could be killer. Can you imagine trying to do a divorce where 7 people are in a marriage and
one person's divorcing 2 of the others, but not the third?
For practicality alone, we can draw an arbitrary line at 2 people.
Little sister, what have you done? Hey, little sister, who's the only